I would like to welcome everybody on wherever you are actually from. Some people are in my classroom here in person, but I guess most of us will be in Zoom. And today's public lecture series, in a way, slash restoration seminar is given by Dr. Huixuan Liao. And believe it or not, she's zooming in from Guangdong, China, which is a beautiful place. I was lucky enough to visit Huixuan. They invited me to their lab. That was a really great experience. It's a tropical or subtropical area. It was just a fantastic experience for me to visit with them. And I would like to introduce Huixuan a little bit before she will start and go into the middle of everything and to her talk about who she really is, how did we, in a way, start working together. So Huixuan and I, we actually met, I believe, in 2012 or 13 first in Missoula, and we overlapped. We worked together in a lab over there, Ray Calloway's lab, and that was a really good experience. And we had some Chromium projects there, but we still actually continuing working together, which is fantastic. Yes, as I mentioned, Huixuan and their lab was kind enough, and they invited me to a conference in Beijing in 2018, I guess. It was long ago.
17.
17? Oh, that long. Anyways, I still remember as it was yesterday. So Huixuan is an associate researcher in the School of Life Sciences at Yat-Sen University in Guangzhou, China. She also received both her bachelor's and PhD degrees from this university. And Huixuan is a scientist working in understanding a lot of really cool trends in ecology, but most specifically, she likes invasive species, and she's particularly interested in uncovering the general mechanisms behind plant invasion and understanding those mechanisms from the behavioral point of view. And you will understand all this after listening to her talk. And after this introduction, I would like to give the stage to you, Huixuan. Thank you so much for zooming in so early back at your country, and we really look forward to your talk. Thank you.
Thank you, Robert. Thank you for the nice introduction. And it's been a great pleasure to be giving this lecture to all of you, and thank you for joining us. So today I will be talking about understanding the functional strategies of invasive plants using large-scale data sets. So as we all know that globalization has increases the incidences of plant invasion. And in the US and Europe, the plant import value per person was over $80 per year. And in China, even though the basic population is so large, this value is still over $40 per year. And you might have seen with your own eyes, or you might have seen these really horrible photos online that shows the the invasion of different kinds of plants. And this is a really notorious invader called kudzu, and it's pretty invasive in the US. And there is another really famous invader that you might all know because it's invasive in the Western US, and it's the cheatgrass. And if you are familiar with Robert's work, you might already be really familiar with this species, Solidago, that's originated from the US, but it becomes super invasive in the Europe. And here is a species that's invasive in the southern China, and you can see that it's called mile a minute for a good reason, because they can produce really, really tiny seeds that can fly all over the place. And so we are doing a lot of work to control this invader in China. And here you can see from the satellite image that there are a lot of coastal areas that's been invaded by this smooth cordgrass. And most of these invaded areas are still expanding. So we have all these horrible photos, and we have these statistics showing that actually invasive species, invasive plants in particular, can result in really significant impact on native communities. From this graph on the left-hand side, you can see that except for plant production of the native community, the other aspects like the growth, abundance of native plants, and the other aspects of animals are heavily impacted. So one of the main reasons why invasive species can have so much impact is that they can colonize the native community and they can replace their native counterparts. But there is an important question as to why we have these invasive plants that are stronger, much stronger than their native counterparts. For animals, their strategies and behaviors are mostly visible. So you can see that these two men, they are competing with each other. And you can see that these two lions, they are pursuing their prey. And this rhino and these birds, they are having a really nice mutualistic relationship. But if you put a bunch of plants together, we can hardly see what's going on between different pairs of individuals. But luckily, invasion ecologists are a group of kind of like imaginative people. They have proposed a lot of hypotheses that help us to understand why plant invasion happens. And in this paper entitled Plant Biological Invasion Theories, Merging Perspectives from Population, Community, and Ecosystem Scales, they have summarized at least 51 different hypotheses that explain plant invasion. As we do not have enough time to go into detail into all of these hypotheses, I will show you a few classic ones to help you better understand why functional strategies are important for plant invasion. So this is a really famous hypothesis called ideal weights. So some scientists believe that invaders, they are better than their native counterparts in every aspect you can imagine. Like they can grow bigger, grow faster, and they reproduce more, and they can utilize resources, waters better than their native counterparts, and many, many other aspects. And here is another really famous hypothesis, which indicates that when we introduce a starting species to the non-native ranges, their specialist enemies might not have been introduced at the same time as this introduction. So they might be under less pressure from natural enemies in their new ranges and gain advantage against their native counterparts. And along the same line as the natural enemy release hypothesis, some scientists believe that with less pressure from natural enemies, the invaders might be able to reallocate the energy that were originally used for herbivory defense to competitive ability. And this hypothesis is called evolution of increased competitive ability, the ICA hypothesis. And this is another really interesting hypothesis proposed by Professor Reagan Calloway. Just now, Robert might have mentioned him that we have visited his lab at the same time period. So in this hypothesis, he believes that because the native counterparts do not have a co-evolutionary history with the invader, so that they cannot tolerate some kind of allelochemicals produced by the invaders. And in this way, the invader might have a competitive advantage by producing this kind of allelochemicals. So we know now that we know that there are so many different hypotheses that explains plant invasion. But how about the generality of all these hypotheses? Luckily, with increasing number of online databases, we're now able to revisit, to test the generality of this hypothesis using this multiple species, using the data of multiple species from multiple regions. And we might even be able to form new hypotheses based on this new analysis. So now I will show you two studies. And the first one is to explore the role of three important functional strategies in global plant distribution. As we all know that one important feature of invasive plants is that they could rapidly expand their range. So during this range expansion process, they need to adopt suitable functional strategies that are needed for them to adapt to the environmental heterogeneity in humidity, temperature, light, nutrient, and herbivory pressures, etc. And there is one really fundamental theory that explains why functional strategies might affect plant distribution. It's called the KR strategy. So this theory was originally proposed by MacArthur and Wilson in their book, The Theory of Island Biogeography, which states that a plant must choose between being dominant in local communities or being like widespread. So they have a strong ability to colonize different habitats. So for the plants that adopt the dominance strategy, that's the K strategy, they will produce fewer offsprings with stronger surviving skills, but they can only travel a short distance from their mother plant. And the other extreme is the R strategy. For the species that adopt this strategy, they will produce many, many offsprings, but they might have pretty weak survival skills. But they are good at long distance dispersal, which gives them more chances of encountering really favorable habitats and successfully colonize. And later, a British ecologist, Philip Grime, proposed, develop this KR strategy further into a triangular trade-off between three different strategies. And this scheme involves factors affecting survival, like competition, stress, and disturbance. And we may still remember that like the K strategy is for dominance. And he believes that on the one hand, a plant might choose to become a strong competitor, so it can dominate communities with a large abundance of competitors. And on the other hand, it may also choose to be a stress tolerator. So it can dominate in habitats with a lot of stress, such as low nutrient content and drought or waterlogging and even high salinity, etc. And the other end of this strategy scheme is the ruderal strategy that overlaps with the R strategy, and it's driven by the disturbance frequency. So the ones that need to adapt to frequent disturbance, they might become ruderal species that have pretty short lifespans and fast turnover rate. So Dr. Grind believes that these three strategies are the basic strategies that can explain the, how plants adapt to the environment, and they can affect plant distributions. Like each strategy may have an advantage under different circumstances. And there is an important fact that I need to point out is that most invasion mechanisms indicate that there are differences in biotic and abiotic conditions between the introduced and native ranges. For instance, just now we've mentioned enemy release and ICA hypothesis and novel weapons. They have all pointed to a fact that the invader might encounter different levels of competition, abivari loads, and other kind of like inhibitory or mutualistic relationship with the biotic organisms in the new range. And there are other hypotheses suggesting that invaders might benefit from frequent disturbances from humans. And there might be some climatic mismatch between the introduced and native ranges. So because we know that competitor, stress tolerator, and ruderal strategies might play different roles under different conditions, so it is really important to know which strategy is more important for range expansion of plants. And in particular, due to the differences between the introduced and native ranges, are the dominant strategies in these two ranges more of the same or different? To answer this question, we compiled a global dataset of plant CSR scores and range sizes for 2,645 vascular plants. And what we found is quite interesting. So for the global and native range distributions, the R strategy was more important than the C strategy. So the ruderals are like have a better advantage than the competitors. And in contrast, in the introduced range, the C strategy, the competitors have a greater advantage against the ruderal species. And regardless of which regions we are studying, or regardless of whether it's in the global or native or introduced range, the S strategy was always negatively associated with plants' range size. So there are three implications from this study. The first one is that we can see that actually the range-limited species in the native range usually possess a weak R strategy, which indicates that they have weak dispersal ability. So there is a high potential for us to conserve this species by increasing their propagular pressures and aiding the dispersal to distant habitats. And another implication is that the widespread invaders in the introduced range, they usually possess a strong competitor strategy and a weak stress tolerance. So when we think of how to control these widespread invaders, we might pay more attention to increasing the invasion resistance of the resident communities, such as manipulating the species composition of the native communities to make them more resistant to invasion. And we should also like restrict the level of disturbances that might increase the nutrient level or create some kind of favorable habitat for the invader. And the third implication is kind of like really interesting. And when I first came up with this, and I thought it's kind of like a really important aspect that we might have overlooked in previous studies. So some of you might know that there is a way for us to predict the introduced range of an invader. That is to like estimate its invasive range by like taking reference of the native range size, because there is a general assumption that the ecological niche of a species can predict where it can distribute in the new range. And the general assumption thinks that the invader, the ecological niche of the invader in the native range and the introduced range should be approximately the same. But according to our study, we will see that actually this prediction may depend, the accuracy of this prediction may depend on the strategy of the species. For instance, if the species is a strong competitor, it might not have an advantage in its native range, so it might have a relatively small native range size. So if we assume that the invasive range size equals the native range size, then we might underestimate its invasive range size. And there is another extreme. So if the species is a ruderal species, because ruderal strategy is really advantageous in the native range, so we might overestimate its invasive range size if we solely based on the ecological niche theory. And in the next case study, I would just like introduce more dimensions of invasion. As we all know that invasion is not just about range extension. According to Parker, the invasiveness of a plant should be the product of its range size, its effect, and its abundance. So what about the functional strategies behind other dimensions of invasion? Actually, quite a few evidence have already shown that these different dimensions do not always co-vary. For instance, widespread species are not necessarily dominant. And the species that dominate local communities are not necessarily widespread. In addition, widespread species may not always have strong impact on native ecosystems or vice versa. So there is an important question, is like, are there other different dimensions of invasion associated with different functional characteristics? To answer this question, we compiled a data set of 395 non-native species in the US and Europe. And these abundance and impact matrices are based on the field data from Robert and his colleagues. And the occurrence data was downloaded from the Global Biodiversity Information Facility, and we also obtained the functional traits that might reflect the functional strategies of this species. That's downloaded from the tri-trait database. And we did prove our assumption that different dimensions of invasion are like associated with different functional traits. So the only group of invaders that we found that meets our expectation of ideal weight is the ones that have strong impact on native plant abundance. They have strong competitive ability and an acquisitive resource investment strategy, but a potentially weak preference by herbivores, which makes them ideal weights. And the invader that have a large range size, they are successful at the regional scale with the help of the traits that promote rapid colonization. But the invaders that are successful at the local scale, such as the ones that are abundant in the local communities, they have the traits that are less preferred by herbivores. And we can see that, strangely enough, some locally successful invaders even possess traits that facilitate a high stress tolerance and a conservative strategy, which were similar to locally abundant native species. So the two important implications from this study is that an ambiguous definition of invasion success in mechanism-related studies may produce inconsistent or even controversial conclusions. In invasive plants, especially some invasive plants, as we have seen, are quite similar to native plants, so they might not be as different from native plants as commonly expected. So from these two case studies, we can see that large-scale datasets does have the potential to improve our understanding of plant invasion. They can reveal the general patterns that might resolve controversies in previous studies, and they may help discover new patterns that may be masked by data variations when sample size was small. So the development of comprehensive large-scale databases is fundamental for future studies. However, there are also limitations of these large-scale studies. I think the most important and foremost reason is that it is necessary to study the mechanism of some specific species, such as this really famous invader in the US, cheatgrass. And there is a really interesting mechanism that it relies on to increase its advantage. It's the grass fire cycle facilitated by this species that can eliminate its native counterparts by introducing this severe fire. And there is another example of this necessity to study specific species, that is the mile-a-minute grass herb that's in China. So we recently have a really interesting discovery about this species. That is, the populations that are adapted to the high salinity in the coastal regions, they have not lost their ability to adapt to other stressors such as drought and waterlogging. However, the native counterparts that coexisted with this species, if they have evolved stronger salinity ability, they would lose their ability to adapt to any other stressors. And that is the way this species might, this myominid herb might gain an advantage against the native counterparts. And there are also challenges to large-scale studies. So we may not have enough data for some specific groups or even really important groups of plants that might result in the under or over representation of these groups. So this might result in some bias in our conclusion. And there is another really important bias when we are conducting these large-scale studies. That's the publication bias, which causes significant bias to the data. So publication biases may result from study publication bias that not all studies have been published, and they might result from the outcome reporting bias that not all results have been published, only those more positive or more meaningful results are published. And there's also the spinning, that's the interpretation bias, that sometimes when we are citing or using the data, we might like inappropriately interpreting the negative results as positive results. And there is another bias called citation bias that maybe like in the literatures, people tend to cite those paper with high impact and with the positive results. But it's undeniable that we are now in a golden era of large-scale studies. With the rapid development of all different kind of online databases, we now have better access to the data that we need for answering our questions. And in fact, everyone can contribute to the development of these databases. In China, some approaches have been implemented to increase public participation in scientific data collection. For instance, there is an app called FlowerMate. You can see it from the bottom left corner. And this app helps you to identify the plant of interest. All you have to do is to download the app and take a photo that shows the key feature of the plant of interest. And the app would identify this species for you using AI species image recognition techniques. And it will upload the occurrence records of this species online under your permission. This app is really useful, like if you want to know what kind of species occurs in which places. And there is another similar app called Live Vegetation. And this app combines the efforts of experts and non-experts in recording the occurrence of different vegetation types. So for the non-experts, such as common citizens, they do not know much about vegetation classification, but they can take a photo of the landscape view of the whole community and the dominant species, and let the experts to fill in the other information about this vegetation type. And in this way, we will have a nice database of which vegetation type occurs in which area in China. You can see that these two different apps have increased the possibility of the scientists to have a more comprehensive data set of the distribution of different species and different vegetation types. But the challenge is that these non-expert based databases need to be like validated, and we need to make appropriate corrections to the data before we can actually use it in the scientific research. And so far, this job of validation and correction solely relies on experts. But I believe that with the rapid development of machine learning techniques, maybe one day the machine can finish this job for us. So there are three messages that I want to deliver through this lecture. The first one is that the rapid development of large-scale databases really makes it possible to uncover the general mechanisms behind plant invasion. But we should not solely rely on large-scale studies. We should combine small and large-scale studies to improve our understanding. And both experts and common citizens can contribute to the development of large-scale databases. With that, I would like to thank my school, Yat-Sen University, and the National Science Foundation of China and Guangdong Province. And I would like to thank my colleagues and friends that has been supporting my research all along the way. And thank you all for joining me today. And any comments and questions are welcome. Thank you.
Thank you, Huixuan. I guess I applaud, but you might hear it from the room.
Yeah, here.
Hard to do on
Thank
Zoom.
you.
Thank you. That was really interesting, and I'm not sure how to do it. If Bev and Victoria is on, we can start questions maybe here in the classroom, or if there are questions, let's see among our students. Are there any questions? Yes, I'm bringing the microphone to. So Natasha Chadwell, one of our students, would like to ask you a question.
Has utilizing the apps discovered any new species in China that maybe they didn't know were in a certain area, and maybe spurred action from that?
Well, thank you for the question. I think so far because the AI recognition can only based on our past experience, like our past knowledge about the species. So it's not really possible for them to identify some kind of like new species. But I think you might mean the species that were not thought to occur in the area, and it has been like discovered like the new records of occurrence. It is very likely to happen, but sometimes this might be due to the incorrectness of the AI image recognition or stuff. So it definitely needs to be validated by the experts. Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you so much. Yeah, so we see that. So the app only knows whatever it was seen, right? Those are the features that are in there, and it's hard. Yeah. Any other questions? In the meantime, I'm just kind of I haven't even thought about this, but what you said about the publication bias and the outcome bias, those things are really, interesting to bring in the picture. Because many times we just really want to publish cool results, with good outcomes.
Yeah.
Sometimes there's just like, we found really nothing, and there is no really good forums for those papers and those publications. There are probably some like paper journal for, I don't know, failed researches. It's probably not the title for it, but there is such things out there. Right. So that is very interesting. So what do you think of that? So could that change if we have a lot of neutral, lots of non-meaningful research that could be out there?
Yeah, I think some open access journals are trying to bring public attention to all these results that might not seem really exciting to most scientist, but it might be important. It might be necessary for us to have a really comprehensive view of all these opinions in one research area. I think that's it's like the situation is improving. So now we have pay more attention to avoid bias. So each studies that use this large scale data set, they will have a really long section indicating that how we treat the potential biases or what kind of biases might be in our conclusions.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Questions from you guys? Or anybody from Zoom, I guess you unmute yourself. That would be acceptable.
So, hi, Robert. Hi, Huixuan.
Hi.
How are you?
Yeah. How are you?
Okay, that was a great talk. I'm gonna say three things. The last thing is gonna be a question. But first, if you haven't done so and you have more than one person watching in your connection, please let Victoria know, because we're trying to keep track of attendance. And you know, there are some sponsors who care about that. But anyway, we'd like to keep track of attendance. The second thing is there is a journal of irreproducible results that actually exists, and you know, and there's a sort of a process for sort of making fun of and even giving prizes to people that have particularly provocative research projects. I mean, for example, I remember reading about one years ago. It was not in this area, but it had to do with comparing the academic success of dead students with living students.
Wow.
And you know, the pros and cons of them. They obviously, you know, don't disrupt the class, and so they're, you know, they, you know, that, but that was kind of a funny study, or purported study. And if you want to be entertained, I can recommend checking out the journal Irreproducible Results. It is a lot of fun. And the question I have is not very complicated, but you know, there's a lot, and I'm obviously not in this field, but you had the K technique and the R technique, and I was wondering, because it doesn't really, I can't figure out what words K and R came from, and if they came from any words, or even what language, or because like it's not like the A technique and the B technique, and those two letters in the alphabet are right next to each other. And I'm wondering if they're LMNOPQ techniques that are, you know, all these other techniques that are in between. I'm suspecting rather that there's a K technique and there's a word that starts where there has a K in it, and there's an R technique.
Yeah. Wow. It's kind of like it's a question I've never like questioned why they use this term, and I think MacArthur is an American scientist, so it's hard to say whether he borrowed some kind of words from German or some other Latin language. I never questioned it. So everyone, like in every ecologist know this hypothesis, and they never question it.
So thank you so much. And what time is it there?
It's almost 8 a.m. in the morning.
So,
Yeah.
so good morning.
Good morning. Yeah, it's time for morning coffee.
Any other questions from anyone out there?
Hi, Hi, I'm Daniel.
Hi, Danny.
Hi.
How are you?
So I quickly Googled the K and R questions. I'm sure that R comes from reproduction, fast reproduction. But I think on Wikipedia says something about the K coming from a German word. So you were right on that. Yeah. And my comment is not really a question, but I thought it was relevant given your talk. Is I'm a big fan of Philip Grime and the KR framework overall, but it came to my attention recently that apparently plant physiologists are using this slow, fast plant economic spectrum framework. And that obviously relates very clearly to the RK strategy, at least how you presented in your talk. And I just wanted to make the reflection, just in order to bridge that gap between plant physiologists and plant ecologists, right? Because we sometimes we use different terminology for things that are very, very similar, and just bringing the attention to the fact that, you know, this fast, slow economic spectrum corresponds loosely with the RK functional types, so to speak. And I really enjoyed your talk. Thank you for that. It was really, I like the big picture that you were giving us, and it was really.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, you are right. I forgot to mention that at first I was like really interested only on KR strategy, but then I came across this CSR triangular relationship, and then I found that it's more comprehensive than the KR strategy, and actually it's a like a more developed version of it. And actually the stress tolerator and ruderal, they represent the two extreme of the slow and fast resource use and investment strategy. Yeah, just like you have mentioned.
Yeah, great. Well, thank you. It's 9 a.m. here in Australia, by the way.
Thank you, Danny, for joining to us. It's great.
My pleasure. Thanks for inviting.
In a couple of weeks. Thank you.
Okay, so I found the answer to that in Wikipedia. So the K does come from German. It seems like the theory was advanced by MacArthur and E.O. Wilson. And see where I had the words here. They were let's see. It was a lovely German word.
Can you pronounce it?
Yeah, I can, but I have to find it again because when I went back, the Zoom competed with.
That's exactly what happened to me when I was trying to.
The Zoom competed with Wikipedia, and let's see.
Oh, can I say it? I think I found it.
Yeah. Where is it in the?
On overview is to the left of the mouse picture of the mice.
Yes.
You may be.
Yeah. Kapazitätsgrenze. That means a capacity limit or the capacity boundary.
That's what it exactly means. Yes.
Oh yeah, Robin knows German.
Well, R came from rate, which is, I don't think rate is Rate in German anyway. And that must be why
it is Rate.
Capital, because it's a German noun, and the R is little because it's an English noun. Thank you.
Yeah,
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you for everybody's input. Yeah. Any more questions on Zoom or in the audience? Huixuan, what is your next big project that you would like to actually go into? Will it be including big data sets? Is there any ideas that you want to go with?
Yes. So now I have I have put more focus on plant mycorrhizal interaction. So the next project would be about how this kind of association affect invasion and maybe in a more general sense, plant distribution across the globe. Yeah.